Good morning, good morning, good morning. Hope everybody is doing wonderful this morning. Do me a favor as you come in. I'm going to ask if you would go ahead and share this broadcast out. And if you are not already following, I'm going to ask if you would hit the follow button so that you can keep in touch with us as we do our regular broadcasts. I hope everybody is having a great and wonderful day. If you are with us for the first time, my name is Shantae Charles, and this is Daring Dialogues, where we dialogue about literally any and everything. And we're on a series of books now. We're reading about 10 to 12 books at one time. And every day we cover something different. So if you are interested in a particular subject and you see us reading it on that day, that just simply means that we're going to be reading from that book every single day on that particular book until we're done reading that book. So, for example, on Monday Motivations, we are covering the book Kingdom Disciples by Tony Evans, and we're also covering another book on biblical hospitality. So if you're interested in keeping up with that subject matter, just catch us every Monday at 11 a.m. and we will be reading from those books. On Tuesdays, these are the books that we're reading from. We're reading from Uppity Women, which is a little bit of historical information on several different women, plus something that they said during their lifetime. We're also continuing in Christopher Columbus and the African Holocaust, understanding the slavery and rise of European capitalism and how they tie together. And we are also reading on Tuesdays, Leadership Secrets from the Bible. So if you're interested in any of these subjects, you can join us every Tuesday at 11 a.m. And these are the subject matters that we'll be covering on Tuesdays. So I hope everybody is having a great morning on your side of the world. Good morning to those of you who are coming in. And I want to say this, I had one of those all-nighter prayer nights last night, so please forgive me if I have any bags under my eyes. But I did try to get a little bit of rest before I came on this morning. And I want to say, last night I was really praying for those who are involved in activism and social justice. And I wanted to just say a word of encouragement to those who may be weary in this particular arena, because most people know that social justice is not something that has always been on everyone's radar. We know that the Charlottesville incident has kind of pushed it to the forefront of the world. But for a long time, many of us have been contending both spiritually and naturally, for this particular subject matter of social justice, racial inequality, things that have to do with giving people equal rights, even within the judicial system. So I want to say to those of you who are in that arena, I want to encourage you to keep going, but also make sure that you stop and you pause and you rest. Don't get burned out. Don't allow yourself to get burned out. Understand that you are not the savior of the world. I know sometimes it can seem like you have the world on your shoulders, but understand that you are not the savior of the world. You have limitations within your human body and frame. And so make sure that you are getting the proper rest when you need to rest. And when God says you need to step away and you need to rest and you need to reflect, please make sure you're doing that. Make sure you are taking care of yourself mentally, taking care of yourself, your physical body. As you all know, when I went on my sabbatical for the summer, that was when I found out a lot of things I was dealing with health-wise. And so now I'm on the recovery side. So I just want to encourage those of you who are fighting the good fight of faith. in the realm of racial justice, racial reconciliation, and equality to make sure that you are getting the rest that you need. Because believe it or not, I don't believe that this is going to be something that our generation solves. I believe that this is an ongoing issue, because as long as you have human beings and as long as you have the presence of evil in the world, good morning, Pastor Ben, as long as you have the presence of evil in the world, this is something that is going to need to be resisted, right? Until Christ comes, we are to occupy until he comes, but we're also supposed to resist the devil and resist the forces of evil. So, what does that mean for us realistically? That means that in our generation, we serve our generation, we do our part. Good morning, Bespoke. Good morning, Prophet Mert. That means that we serve our generation the way God has told us to serve them, and we pass the torch on, and we educate this generation coming behind us so that they will be equipped to continue to fight the good fight of faith. Now, I will say this. There are a lot of people who believe that all of the stuff happening with race is simply a distraction from a greater issue, right? And while that may be true, here's the danger in ignoring what is happening racially in this country. The danger of ignoring what's happening racially is that there are people who don't believe that this is a diversion. There are people who really do believe in their superiority. There are people who really will harm you if you get in their way. There are people who really are set on the destruction of people of color. Okay? So even if we know, which we do know, that race is a social construct, right? And we do know that race is a class construct that is used to divide people by skin color, okay? Even though we know that to be true, that really we are the human race, unfortunately, there are far too many people who have bought into their superiority to ignore the very real damage that they're doing to other human beings, okay? So when someone comes to me and says, you don't need to be worried about that because, race is a social construct, race is a made-up thing that the government per se made up so that they can get you distracted. Well, as a person of color, I can't afford to ignore it. Because whether it's made up by the government or not, the fact of the matter is it has very real-time complications for people. It has very real ramifications because there are people around me, okay, who have bought into these constructs and are now filled with hate, okay, and filled with evil, and they have a desire to destroy people of color. Whether it's through socioeconomic ways or whether it's through employment or whether it's through housing, whatever way they can get their hands on, this is in their mind, okay? So whether or not I believe that the government instituted this to bring division, the fact of the matter is it's working. That's the reality that I have to deal with, is that people have bought into it, whether the government set it up that way or not, and therefore I can't afford to ignore it. I can't afford to ignore it. All right. Matter of fact, I just had someone inbox me yesterday, and they said they were shooken up because they had just experienced some domestic terror, and they were on their way, I guess maybe they were on their way to work, and they said they were at a stop sign, and it was a one way, so it wasn't like two lanes, and they said a truck pulled up on the side of them, and it was an older white man who had a long beard, and he just began to yell expletives at her and said, F you, you effing N-word and then just pulled off in front of her and kept going. That's the kind of stuff that, yes, you can say race is not a real construct, but those are the kinds of things that people are doing across the country. And I'm saying that because my husband and I have experienced it twice since the election ourselves. We were just minding our own business, and someone came twice in two different states that we were in to accost us and say what they had to say, and then just wanted to take off. So you have instances like that where telling her that racism doesn't exist, or telling her don't worry about it, for her that was a very real reality that happened to her out of the blue, and she wasn't doing anything but driving while black, and this happens. And so one of the dangers of, like I said, ignoring this is stuff like that. Because again, one thing that Charlottesville showed us, and I don't think that a lot of people, I don't think it's sinking in, but one of the things Charlottesville showed us is that they no longer feel the need to hide. They no longer feel the need to be anonymous in their hate. And so you have people in this country who have held these sentiments for years, maybe even decades, and now they feel bolstered and empowered to go and commit these, what I call, random acts of terror upon people of color. So I can say all day that, race doesn't matter, but the reality is it's having a very real effect on our society. I'm not a television watcher, okay? But there are millions of Americans who run their lives by what they see on television. Let me sip my orange juice on that. I'm going to say it again. There are millions of Americans who run their lives by what they see on television. So even if the images given to them by television are not accurate, okay, we know for a fact that people tend to become what they're beholding. So if all you're beholding is news, and most of that news, I would probably say a good 90% of that news features black people in a negative light, okay, features the things about black society that's negative, and you maybe get about 1% of what's positive in a black community, then your view or your perception of black people, and if you're taking your perception from television, your view of black people is going to be skewed, especially if you don't live near any black people, which in most of America is still very segregated. So a lot of people, unless they're in a major city, don't live near black people. So if you don't live near black people and you don't have black friends, okay, then that means that the construct that you're getting, the view that you're getting, is being interpreted for you through television. So if the only interpretation of black people, black life, and black culture you're getting is maybe one or two good instances of black people, and about 90% of thug, skank, trash, villains, reckless, destroyers. I mean, you just go down the line. All right. Maybe I'll do a whole show on that. All the stereotypes of black people that are perpetuated through media that's actually helping in creating this bubble of thought about black people, which is in turn affecting us worldwide. All right. So if that's where you're getting your information from, then no wonder when I talk to people and when I'm encountering white Americans, a lot of them are saying things like, well, this is just a black person problem. Believe it or not, some people are actually thinking that black people are the worst people in the world. I've heard that said and seen it written. They're thinking that black people commit most of the crime, when statistically that's not even possible, because we only make up, 14% of the population. But yet there's this skewed information that's happening. And like you said, Prophet, but most of us watch television. Black people are the number one consumer of television. So even our perception about our own people is also being skewed because we're also watching it. Which is why I don't understand why black people are watching something that, yes, for many, perception is reality. So this is why I don't understand, why are you tuned in to an image that is specifically designed to paint you as negative, criminal, and a scourge to the earth? That's one reason why I turned off television. Because to me, the images I'm seeing are not a reflection of me. And they're not a reflection of most of the black Americans I know. So I find it insulting. And therefore, I don't watch what insults me. I don't watch what insults my culture. Okay? Because again, people are getting their perception of who black America is from this thing called television. So, let me get off my soapbox on that. If you're going to look at television, I would say take it in small doses. Be in control of what you're watching. Really analyze what you're watching. Turn off the volume. Turn off the volume. Because listen to this. Maybe you haven't thought about this before, but if most of this media going out is going out across the world, and we can get the context sometimes from it because we can see and hear it. But there are other parts of the world that don't understand English. So guess what they're getting? All they're getting is the images of what black people look like in America. So no, it's no wonder when Africans come to America, and a lot of them have a very negative idea of black Americans, because if you're just getting imagery about us from television, then you have a very skewed idea of who we are. Exactly, Prophet Mert. Hell of vision. That's what it often is many times. And so, again, I would encourage you to evaluate what you're looking at. And I know some people will say, well, it's just entertainment. The word entertainment actually means enter to detain you. Something is entering you to detain you. So think about that. What am I allowing to enter into my ear gates? What am I allowing to enter into my eye gates? Am I processing it? Am I analyzing it? Or am I just letting it go because it goes straight to your subconscious? All right. So I just want you to be mindful and be aware that you are allowing yourself to be filled with negative imagery about you and your people group. All right. Just do an analysis on the shows that you watch. I challenge you to do this. Do an analysis on the shows that you watch every week. If you're a black woman, all right, do an analysis on how many images you see of black women that are positive. Every time you see an image of a black woman that's positive, if you are a frequent television watcher, I want you to go home, get you a chart, and put black woman, positive, negative, questionable. And when you sit down and watch television, I want you to check off how many things you see about black women that are positive, that are negative, that are questionable. This includes the commercials as well that they run in between the shows. And then I want you to look at that list at the end of the week and make a decision. Am I going to continue to watch certain shows that show us as negative, angry, crazy, insane, adulterous, the imagery? Same thing with men. As a black man, what kind of images are being put in front of you? And I will say this. I've seen some shows where the black man is he's not even in the picture. I'm just saying. So keep in mind what you're looking at. And my husband will tell you, I used to watch, what was that television show? Hallmark. I used to watch Hallmark a lot. Right? Because people said, well, Hallmark is a pretty good channel. But then I started noticing a pattern after I kept watching Hallmark. I kept noticing, and maybe this has changed, but I still pick up the movie sometimes when I'm in the library and I look in, I read the cover, and I look at the back. And I noticed that none of the lead roles in Hallmark movies are black women. I'm like, wait a minute. We can't get a love story that's positive? There are some, I noticed they started putting some supporting roles where black women were kind of in the background, but I haven't seen a lead actress in a Hallmark movie that's black. Now, if I'm wrong, somebody email me a link where there's a black woman as a lead character in a Hallmark movie. And I like Hallmark, but my thing is, I don't see in any of these movies, and there's been hundreds of them. They do several of them throughout the Christmas holidays. Okay? And I'm like, where is our representation? We are not just the sidekick in a movie. So, again, analyze what you're watching. Think about the representation of us that's being given in what you watch. All right? So, I'm now going to get off my soapbox on that. But again, in terms of activism, I just want to encourage people who are active in the work to make sure that you rest, make sure you're taking time for yourself, make sure you're taking time to refuel and recharge. All right, moving along. Couple of women today from the brains and brass section of Uppity Women. All right. And let's see. First woman is Vinnie Ream Hoxie. Vinnie Ream Hoxie. Her last name is Hoxie. She lived from 1847 to 1914. And the quote here says, "With trembling hands, I had taken the proportions of the figure from the blood-stained garments President Lincoln had worn on that last and fearful night." Vinnie Ream, a young artist from the Wisconsin wilderness, spoke those words in a speech to Congress. Earlier, from 1864 to 1865, she had spent 5 months with President Lincoln, who sat for her each morning. The teen had won a competition to sculpt his likeness. After the assassination, a shocked Congress commissioned a life-size statue of the fallen president. Thanks to her superlative work, Vinnie again was chosen. She spent several years in Europe, choosing the marble and carving the statue, unveiled with emotional ceremony in 1871. After marriage, Vinnie Ream Hoxie continued to sculpt, creating her own legacy. Like Lincoln, she'd been born in a log cabin and had come a long, long way. So they basically chose her because of her closeness to the president, as well as the fact that she had not only taken proportions for a bust of him, but that she had regular access to him and she had gotten proportions for his entire figure, so she was able to give an accurate measurement of the president. Pretty cool. Let's see here. Another young lady, Prudence Crandall. Prudence Crandall. She lived from 1803 to 1890. And it says, her quote here says, "Then let it, the school, sink. I will not dismiss her." Those were the fighting words of a stout-hearted teacher who ran a school for girls. Invited to start an academy by upscale Connecticut residents, Prudence admitted a black teen into her school in 1831. White parents had a fit yanking their girls out. Crandall coolly changed gears, advertising her school for young ladies and little misses of color. Because guess what? She said, y'all not going to outdo me. How about that? Y'all want to pull all of y'all young little white daughters out of my school? Well, I'm just going to advertise to the people of color. See how that works? Gutsy students enrolled, but the academy was terrorized by pistol firing and entrail slinging protesters. The ugly acts of racism extended to charges against Crandall and several trials, which she ultimately won. So they put her on trial because she opened up her finishing school to black girls. Malicious harassment continued, however, until Crandall finally had to leave the area. After the Civil War, Connecticut's legislature shamefacedly repealed the Black Law, which claimed that free African Americans were not actually citizens, and granted the now elderly Crandall an annual $400 pension and an apology. Crandall had failed in her mission to provide an education for her students, but she had taught the town a lesson. Isn't that a mess? The Black Law. I guarantee if you probably do a little bit of research on the Black Law, you will find a lot more detail. During this time, there were they're calling it Black Law, but there were also Black Codes. Some here I know in Virginia and some in Maryland. You can actually look them up. And there were literally hundreds of laws and rules written specifically for black people. One of them that I remember off the top of my head had to do with the fact that if there was more than 6 black people meeting anywhere together at one time, there had to be a white person present. They were so afraid of black people getting together positively, and they were so afraid of an uprising of any kind being planned, that if more than 6 black people gathered together, a white person had to be present. And believe it or not, some of those laws are still in existence. Maybe not written as black people, but I know in Virginia, in the town that we used to live in Virginia, if there was a group or gathering of children and there was more than 6 of them, it was considered a gang. And the police could be called on those children, and they would have to be forced to disband if they were out in public. So yeah, these kinds of laws that were originally meant for black people, some of them have been tweaked and some of them are still on the books. Okay? Just thought you should know that. So yeah, little homework for you. Research the black codes, and you're going to see how many laws may be, as I say, off the books, but they're still in the hearts of people. They're off the books, but some of these laws and some of the intent of the law has been passed down generation to generation. Here's another one. I think this was from the black codes in Maryland. There was a law that said that black people could not practice certain professions. And that if they practiced anything in the arts or anything in sports, that those were the 2 areas that they could go into without facing any type of pushback. So when people say, why do we seem to have this tradition where blacks seem to only excel or only be pushed into either a sports route or an entertainment and arts route. That has to do with history. All right? There were certain professions that blacks were banned from historically. Okay? So, just wanted to give you that little bit of background there. We're moving on to Christopher Columbus and the African Holocaust. Slavery and the rise of European capitalism. Just checking my time here. We seem to be doing pretty good for time. All right. Last time we were talking about this notion of Christopher Columbus and how did he get all of this influence in the world. And one thing that we found out is that Christopher Columbus had been participating in the slave trade, right? For 23 years, he had been going up and down the coast of Africa, participating in the slave trade before he gets these bright ideas to go to the New World. All right. So that's kind of where we last talked about Christopher Columbus. And Father de las Casas is where we stopped, where we talked about he's being called the first historian of the New World. Okay. He would write things down, and Christopher Columbus would go to him after the third voyage and the rapid disappearance of the Indians. All right. Father de las Casas said that from 12 to 25 million people were killed. And he was just talking about the Caribbean islands alone. We're not talking about South America, although he does allude to Mexico and South America, but his main concentration was on the Caribbean islands. Christopher Columbus would go from one place to the other. He thought Cuba was Japan. He was sent to the East Indies, and he would end up in the West Indies. He told his sailors, remember, to sign a document that they were in the East Indies. And if they didn't sign, he would cut their tongue out. Ivan van Sertima has done an informative and concise chapter on this in his book, They Came Before Columbus. Now remember, we introduced the book, They Came Before Columbus, in season 1, and we're probably going to come back to that book. When we look at this man and what he has set in motion, he set in motion the increase in the African slave trade. The British had not entered the slave trade at first because the British had some difficulty with the Catholic Church. However, once the British decided to establish a church of their own, and if you're of British extraction and you belong to the Church of England, you have to live with the fact that here's a church whose foundations was based on the passions, the sexual passions of Henry VIII. All right? Henry VIII wanted to cut off one wife's head and wanted to marry another one. He wanted all these wives, and he wanted justification. He wanted a church that would back him up in all of his skullduggery, including his thievery, his raid on the church treasury. So he created the kind of church that would give him what he wanted. All right? This is historical fact, by the way. The Church of England. Throughout his career, he defended the church as so sacred. It was sacred to him because it let him do what he wanted to do. He referred to the church as though it were synonymous with the state. The queen, whose head he cut off, was the only one that gave him a child that survived. That child was Elizabeth I. Someone called her the Virgin Queen of England. We won't discuss that any further. They showed her a ledger of what could be made in the slave trade after she had refused to go into the business, and she finally went into the business. One of the ships was her personal property, and this is a ship that a lot of people refer to, the good ship Jesus, commanded by Captain John Hawkins. Britain came into the slave trade and made it a business, a dirty business, but a business. They were well-organized gangsters with territory. The British sailed up the Gambia River and took 10 miles on each side. That's the little facsimile nation that is called the Gambia. Right now, it was never a viable nation in the true sense. They would spread their slaveholding further west, and they would push the Portuguese out of the West African slave trade. So, what about the world Christopher Columbus set in motion? He set in motion Western racism. He set in motion the colonization not only of history, but also the information about history. All of the fight over curricula was set in motion because Christopher Columbus and others set in motion a concept called divine white right. I wish somebody would type that for me. Divine white right, or manifest destiny. Most of us, again, have been taught manifest destiny in school, but that manifest destiny is the assumption that people of Europe had rights over other people. Thank you. That they had rights to rule and dominate other people. It set in motion a bogus concept of a chosen people by God. Remember, okay, this is very important for Christians who are engaging in this dialogue to understand what manifest destiny is and what are some of the doctrines that you're going to come up against when talking about this. All right? The reason why they felt that they had the right to rule people of color is because, according to white supremacists, people of color were not in the line of Adam and Eve. I'm going to say that again. According to their doctrines, according to their interpretation of the Bible, people of color were not in the line of Adam and Eve. So you cannot reason with them and say, we're all human. You cannot reason with them and say, we're all made in the image of God. I'm saying this for a reason, because I see people trying to reason with white supremacists to tell them, but we're all made in the image of God. You have to understand, they do not believe that. They don't. Let me tell you what they believe, because I've read their doctrines and their books. They believe that people of color were made on the 6th day of creation. They believe that people of color were made as beasts. Okay? So in their mind, you have no real standing as a human being. To them, you are a beast, created on the 6th day. And so if I'm reading the scriptures and it says that he gave human dominion over the beasts of the field, that would include that if I'm in the line of Adam and Eve and I believe you're created as a beast on the 6th day, then I have divine right to rule over you as a beast of the field. I hope everybody's understanding what I'm saying. All right? So their doctrine is driving their belief system about how they treat black people. All right? I'm going to say that again. Their doctrine drives how they treat black people. This is why they can make court rulings and say, well, black people are 3/5 of a person. Or black people are not really human, so they can't really claim citizenship. So we don't have to treat them like citizens. Because you have to first look at their doctrine. What is it that they believe about people of color? All right? And I'm going to go one step further and say there are a lot of white Christians who still believe this doctrine. They do. They believe that God has given white people the divine right to rule over everybody else. I'm going to just let that sit for a moment, because if you talk to many of these white Christians, okay, they don't really value or put the same, how can I say it? The same measure of validation on the words of black preachers or black churches. And I'm talking not just from assumption, I'm talking from experience. Okay? They tend to believe the word of their own preachers and their own theologians over the words of black theologians and black scholars and black preachers. And I'm telling you why they do. Because there is an assumption that they have a divine right over other people. And I've heard some of them say to me, okay, that they must have some sort of divine right, or else people of color would not have been in the condition they were in. They don't see it as a specific engineering of people of color being put on the bottom. They see it as God put you on the bottom. You're supposed to be on the bottom, and we're supposed to be on top because God gave us the right to be on top. So if you challenge their right to be on top and you bring them evidence that the structure that we are now in, especially in America, has been specifically and intentionally engineered to keep black people on the bottom, they will tell you that you're just making it up. It does show they're not reading the Bible in its entirety. But what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to explain to you the nature of some of the arguments that you see on television. You know, that thing that people can't stay away from. Some of the nature of the arguments has to do with, if black people weren't quote unquote cursed, then they would be doing better than they are. But when you provide them data that shows that there were intentional, systematic things to keep black people on a lower level, many of them will ignore the data and they will say, I don't believe the data. So you have to understand where they're coming from, and you have to understand their mindset and their doctrine that has been taught to them. They have been told they are special and they are superior. And I'm talking Christian and non-Christian. That's what they've been told. They have been told that most white people are really good and that there are a few bad apples. On the converse, they have been told most black people are really bad and there are a few good black people. This is why you will hear a lot of them say things like, you're a good black person. You're not one of them. Put some hearts on the screen if somebody has ever said that to you. You're not like those other ones. You're really good. You're a good black person. You're different from those other ones. I know I've heard it several times. Oh, we're not talking about you, Shantae. I mean, you're one of the good ones. You are, you're one of the good black people. Because the assumption is the majority of black people are not good. And they've been taught that the majority of white people are good. So when you talk to them about a, say, Dylan Roof or a Timothy McVeigh, right? Yeah, they've said it in innuendo, not direct. Yes. When you talk to them about people like Timothy McVeigh, Oklahoma City bombing, Dylan Roof, Charleston 9, okay, Ted Bundy, Jeffrey Dahmer, they will say to you, those were the few bad apples. But one of the things that horrified a lot of white people, believe it or not, over Charlottesville, is that I believe many of them for the first time recognized this is not just a few bad apples. See, you can hide behind the notion of a few bad apples when you see 3 to 5 maybe people in white hoods, and you can treat them as the bad cousin or the bad uncle or the bad grandpa in the family, and it's just a few bad apples. But when you see thousands of young white men who obviously were birthed out of another generation before them, when you see thousands of young, educated, supposedly educated white men with no hoods on, marching with torches, you recognize, wait a minute, this is not just a few bad apples. This is a problem. And we better fix it, and we better solve the problem quickly. All right? Let me keep reading this chapter ending here. If God chooses one people over another people, then God is a bigot. You cannot say this is also a God of love. God is kind, no respecter of kith and kin, and say, God chose me to do this to other people. Then while people are choosing, inasmuch as all chosen people choose themselves, why don't you choose yourself to be free? Why won't you make a choice and say, we are too proud to live like this? Why don't you understand what went wrong with the world Christopher Columbus did not discover? Why can't we understand how other people rose from the bottom and recovered what belonged to them? So that is the end of our introduction with Christopher Columbus and the African Holocaust. Next week, we're going to come and talk about the nature of the gathering storm. And he's going to talk about the Christopher Columbus era and some of the myths of Christopher Columbus. And then we're going to get into what was happening in Africa before the slave trade. Because a lot of people think, especially because of the way history is taught in America, a lot of people think that people in Africa had no culture, no history, that there weren't kingdoms already established in these things. They believe what they see on television. Again, they believe what they see on television. They believe what they see on television. So if you're only getting an image of Africa that is naked babies, naked women, mud huts, floods of disaster, famine, disease, So if that's the only image you have of Africa, and I'm going to say this, even black people still only have that image of Africa. If that's the only image of Africa that you have, of course, as the gentleman on the Young Turk says, of course, you're going to be thinking that you are the most superior culture because you're being shown someone in their state that doesn't look like yours, that's not clean, or that's not polished, or that's not healthy. All right? There's plenty of black people that say, oh, I will never go to Africa. I don't want to go to Africa, because of the idea they have in their mind about Africa. And you can't convince them that Africa is not what they see on television. But think about it this way. If I knew a place that had diamonds, minerals, plants for healing, oil, why in the world would I give you an accurate interpretation of a place that I am trying to rob of its treasures? Somebody help me understand. If I know that the more people that find out how very rich in resources Africa is, they're going to be trying to go over there, hint, hint, the Chinese, all right, who are now recolonizing Africa. Okay? If I know these things about Africa, why would I present you with an accurate picture of Africa? I'm hoping that you never go over there. I'm going to agree with you. No, don't go over there. I'm hoping that you never get an idea to go over to Africa because I'm too busy robbing Africa of its resources. So I don't want competition. I don't want you to find out what's in Africa. I don't want you to go searching for your people or your people group. Why would I do that? Why would I want you to do that? So, people, you know what I say about it. Think for yourself. Do some research. Google, how about this? Google 10 major African cities and hit images and see what you find. That's in Africa, by the way. So let's move on to our next book as we close. Leadership Secrets from the Bible, From Moses to Matthew, Management Lessons for Contemporary Leaders. And we're going to read this section called Integrity Despite Temptation and Adversity. We're going to get through, probably get through this section. If not, we'll stop at a good place. I think we'll read through it. Integrity Despite Temptation and Adversity. The story of Zacchaeus shows us that people who have lost their integrity can find it again. Welcome, Mr. Perry. The story of Zacchaeus shows us that people who have lost their integrity can find it again. Zacchaeus was a tax collector for the Roman government, one of the least popular professions in ancient Israel. But he was not beyond rehabilitation. Because he was a short man, he climbed the tree so he could see more clearly and hear this mysterious prophet Jesus. Jesus' response was to invite himself to the home of this social outcast. Zacchaeus, come down immediately, for I must stay at your house today, Jesus said. All the people saw this and began to mutter, "He is gone to be the guest of a sinner?" But Zacchaeus stood up and said, "Look, Lord, here and now I give half of my possessions to the poor, and if I have cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay him back 4 times the amount." Now, this man encounters Christ for the first time, and he is willing to give up half of everything he owns. So please don't tell me that you have had an encounter with Christ and you are still stingy. Let's start there. All right? He said, "I am willing to give up half of my possessions to the poor." And then he proceeds to say, if I've cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay him back 4 times the amount. You mean to tell me one conversation with Jesus has made this man a philanthropist, and he is willing to provide reparations? And not just reparations. He said, I will pay them back up to 4 times the amount that I stole. So you mean to tell me that all of these people in our country who are claiming to have a serious relationship with the Lord Jesus has not been convinced yet to provide reparations from all of the people that they stole from? Let me sip my orange juice on that. Listen, one conversation with Jesus will shake down your pockets. I know. One conversation with Jesus. One encounter with the true and living God will number one let you know that he does not look like Kenny Loggins. Okay? That was my first revelation of Christ, by the way. Wait a minute. This man has bronze feet. One conversation with Jesus shook down this man's pockets. He just started, okay, I want to be clear. If Jesus is coming to my house, let me just get it right before he even show up to the house, okay? Jesus has said, I'm coming. And Zacchaeus is like, listen, Lord, look at here. He said, here And now I give half of my possessions to the poor. So let's get that out of the way. Money is not going to be why I'm not about to come into the kingdom. Hello. And cheating is not going to be why I don't come into the kingdom, because I'm about to give back, and not just give back, but I'm going to give back 4 times. So, believers, giving and getting rid of the cheating and the scheming. Giving, getting rid of the cheating and the scheming. Giving, getting rid of the cheating and the scheming. That's what Zacchaeus did. That's a pretty big turnaround for a tax collector. Even Samuel, Israel's high priest, promised to give back only what he had taken, not 4 times what he had taken. Sometimes the integrity of those who have sinned, listen to this, sometimes the integrity of those who have sinned outshines that of those who have always taken the high road. Man, that's something to think about. I'm going to just say la. Sometimes the integrity of those who have sinned outshines that of those who have always taken the high road. In the early 1990s, audio tapes revealed that a group of Texaco executives had racist attitudes and were systematically denying the hiring and promotion of African Americans. Well, I just don't understand why African Americans can't get nowhere in this world. Exhibit 10259873456910. A group of Texaco executives had racist attitudes and were systematically denying the hiring and promotion of African Americans. Texaco denied the problem at first, but finally, CEO at the time, Peter Bougier, decided to take an approach with more integrity. He fired one of the offending executives, he denied retirement benefits to another, and he established a plan to hire more African Americans at all levels of the organization and settled a lawsuit for $140 million. That's a pretty big turnaround for an oil executive. Rick Rossett of AT&T Solutions might have been tempted to misrepresent his organization's capabilities, since his new venture represented a huge financial risk for the organization and a personal risk to his professional future. Although he needed every bit of new business he could get, he turned away clients he didn't feel he could serve correctly and admitted errors immediately without all too common hemming and hawing. What inspired me most about Rick was how honest he was about the business, notes their chief technology officer, Dick Anderson. He wouldn't hesitate to say to a client, you know, we didn't do this thing right, or we don't think we should work for you. His aim wasn't so much to smell like a rose all the time, but instead to make things right. As a client, he engaged us in good faith, give and take. He was honest, a man of his word, and courageous, and I will only work with a partner like that. Warren Buffett, who has risen to the top in the rough and tumble world of investing, notes that a lack of honesty can create adversity. You might think that his hiring criteria would be aggressiveness and hard-headed numbers crunching, but listen to his real hiring criteria. Integrity, intelligence, and energy. Somebody type that. Integrity, intelligence, and energy. Hire someone without the first, and the other 2 will kill you. Now, y'all know I'm going on my page today, and I'm going to quote Warren Buffett because he is sure enough right. If they have integrity, intelligence, and energy, that's a good thing. But if you hire somebody without integrity, their intelligence and their energy might kill your business. Yes, it will. The Bible is very specific about doing business honestly. It says this, Do not have two differing weights in your bag, one heavy and one light. Do not have two different measurings in your house, one large and one small. You must have accurate weights and measures so that you may live long in the land. So, if a country is built off of inaccurate weights and measures, differing weights of punishment, differing weights for allowing people to get opportunity, they might have the same skill set, but this person gets a different weight because of their color. He says, if you want to live long in the land, make sure that you don't have unequal balances of weight. If you want to live long in the land of Merrill Lynch, integrity is respected. Chairman Emeritus John Tully called brokers when they made a large killing of $2 million or $3 million. They thought I was calling to congratulate them, he says. But what I was really calling to ask them was a few questions. How did you make all that money? If the New York Times put how you did it on the front page, would you be proud? I wanted to remind them of the culture of my firm, and I wanted to make sure they lived it. Tully also made integrity the first order of business in the performance appraisals of the firm's top 200 people. The first question we always asked was never, how much did Dan produce? It was always, have you ever known Dan to distort or color the truth? Tully also insisted that the firm display its integrity during the 1987 stock market crash. Some firms elected to minimize the damage by hiding from their customers during that period. I said today's going to be a day when we're remembered for how we act. I want you to get out there, answer the phones, treat your clients with respect, give them good counsel, and do what's right for the people. And you will be awash in clients. It never works the other way around. Another man who adhered to the same principles of integrity under adversity as Tully, but predates him about 4,000 years, was Job. You may argue that those Bible leaders had it easy, that they lived in a much less complex world and traded in a few camels, not billions of dollars. But the issues of right and wrong were much more clear-cut then, and ethical decisions could be made a lot more easily. You may reason that, but tell that to the protagonist in the book of Job. It is one of the longest books in the Bible, an extended debate on integrity, humility, and discipline, and how these are to be applied in the real world. So next week, we're going to come back and talk about the patience of Job and the integrity of Job. I often tell people, if you look at the life of Job, Satan was not after Job's materials. Satan was not after Job's health. He only used those things because he was after Job's integrity. That's what he wants to challenge. All right? So, this has been another episode of Daring Dialogues. I hope that you have enjoyed our dialogue today. I know we covered several different subjects, but that's what we do. All right? So, if you enjoyed this broadcast, I'm going to ask if you will please share it out. Share or copy the URL link if you know how to do that. Share it in your Periscope feed so that your other followers can listen in and join us. And I hope that you will take time to do some of the challenges that I talked about today. Look at what you are looking at, right? Take a look at what you're viewing and actually observe it, analyze it. Think about, what are you allowing in your eye gates and what are you allowing in your ear gates? If you have no idea of the vast beauty of Africa, please Google the top 10 cities in Africa and hit the images icon for Google, and you'll be able to see all of the technological progress that Africa is making. with or without the help of the United States. All right? Until next time, remember, light is the most daring opposition to darkness. Please be a light today. Take care and God bless.